Hello and welcome to US 1. Today's lesson will be about a war begins. The Civil War is about to start, and we really need to get to the root of what was going on. When we talk about slavery was the central issue of the Civil War, you really have to look back at the history to really make that conclusion. And so first, let's look at the compromises that lead up to the Civil War. And if you remember, I've showed a video in class, and I'm going to put it in my folder for YouTube as a favorite, and it shows, all the compromises, and they would say, yeah, now that they did this, and this problem never came up again, and then it comes up again. So let's get started with the Missouri Compromise. This is something we really need to remember. It's the first compromise about slavery because what was happening is as we get more and more territory, we got the Louisiana Territory and Michigan, all these other things going on here, um, states are starting to come out of them. They're starting to form states. Remember, they decided not to extend existing states. When all this got started, they decided to start making new states. Well, when you make a new state, you get representation. So you get representatives because of how much population you get, which is not a lot for these new states. Nobody's really worried about that. What they are worried about is the Senate. And if they come up with too many states that are in favor of slavery, then slavery will be forever in America. And if there are too many states that are against slavery, then the slave states will be worried, well, then they're going to take away our slaves. So they come up with a compromise to make sure it doesn't happen. There are two states coming into the Union, Missouri and Maine. And so the Missouri Compromise says Maine will be a free state and Missouri will be a slave state. And then we're going to draw a line, and anything above that will be free, and anything below it will be slave. So the northern states looked at that and was like, well, you got this one above the line, you got some others above the line, but look at all this territory. That's going to be free states, so it'll be, it should work out. Well, Texas would come in as a slave state, and Michigan and Wisconsin would come in as free states later, and Iowa, so forth. So it comes up again where California now, all these states are coming in as free states. Only Texas came as a slave state. And remember, we got Oregon and California and the Southwest Territories. But California is below that line. And California is very rich. Remember the gold rush? And they're going to buy their way into the Union and say, we want to be a state, but we want to be a free state. Well, this is a problem because they would do the one for one. You get one free state, one slave state. We got the Missouri Compromise line. They're below the Missouri Compromise, at least part of them. So what are we going to do? Well, the southern states, the slave states, said, okay, you can have it as a free state because that's what they want. However, we would like fugitive state slave laws strongly enforced. So if a slave escapes to the north, we want you to pick them up and bring them back. Well, this becomes the next compromise. And here's the problem with that. First of all, the free states are starting to get more power, so they're going to have a little bit more sway in the Senate. Still won't be able to knock out slavery, but now they're going to be agitated because slaves are going to come into the North. The North is very sympathetic to these slaves trying to escape. They don't like the idea of slavery. And then they're going to see people dragged away from their own free state, dragged back into slavery. Sometimes just because the person's skin is black. It doesn't, it's very difficult to discern who was a slave and who wasn't a slave. And some of these people are just greedy and unscrupulous, and they grab free black men and women and drag them into slavery when they never were slaves. So you can imagine, first of all, being an African American in the North, you thought you were safe, and now with these fugitive slave laws being very strictly enforced, you are very afraid that you're going to be dragged off into the South. So, the South got their way with the fugitive slave laws, but it really kind of backfires because the North now sees in their own backyard the brutality of slavery and how these people are being dragged off into slavery. People that they've known and that they said, no, they're not slaves, and then they're gone. They become slaves. And people that ran away and are seeking freedom. and they see these people with their own two eyes, and they're now being dragged back into slavery. It's a situation where the North is going to start getting more and more angry about slavery because of these fugitive slave acts. So let's take a look at our vocabulary before we go any further. These compromises, a compromise is a middle way between extremes. Usually that's a good thing. I get a little bit, you get a little bit, we're happy. So we compromise. We took what was important to us and we left off the table that something that wasn't. So that's what we're trying to go through here with these compromises. And then fugitive, someone who has escaped from a place and has gone into hiding. So these slaves are escaping and trying to go into hiding and get away from the institution of slavery. All right, the last compromise that we're going to talk about is not going to be named a compromise at all, like the Missouri Compromise or the Compromise of 1850, but in 1854 we call it the Kansas-Nebraska Act. So remember they were talking about all these states being free and all the states down here are slave. Well, the South realized this is not working out too well. So why don't we let the states, as they come in, they decide, okay? They get to vote, they decide themselves whether they're free or state. Why should the Congress decide when the people can decide? Sounds like a really good idea. However, when they set up Kansas to be a state, all these people from the South started pouring in so that they would come in and vote to be slave, and then all the northern people came in, so they vote to be free, and sooner or later they start fighting. Literally, it's basically Kansas just erupts with violence, political violence. Slave people are beating up and killing free people, and free people are coming in beating up and killing slave people. So it is a really dark time for Kansas, but they do eventually vote to be a free state. Okay, so that is the three. There we have our three compromises. Missouri Compromise makes Missouri a slave, Maine a free, and then draws an imaginary line. Anything above would be free, anything below would be slave. And then we have the Compromise of 1850 that brings California in as a free state, but strengthens fugitive slave laws. And then the Kansas-Nebraska Act says that the new states coming in will get to vote. And it's called popular sovereignty. They're sovereign. They get to decide based on a popular vote of what they're going to be, free or slave states. All right, so now talking about the fugitive slave laws, we have a case here of Dred Scott. It's a very important decision because it really crystallizes what's going on in America. Dred Scott is a slave from the South, of course, and he is brought to the North on a regular basis. He spends a lot of time on free soil. And so he sues for his freedom, saying, "Look, I'm in free territory. I should be free. You know, if the state is free and that's their laws, then everybody should abide by that, and I should not be a slave." So he takes it all the way to the Supreme Court, and so the Supreme Court says, "No, you have to remain a slave." One of the worst Supreme Court decisions of all time. Terrible decision, and it backfires massively because the North is outraged that they have to now respect a law that is against the law in their state. How does another state force another state to obey that other state's law? Okay, that was a little confusing. State A is forcing State B to enforce State A's laws when when State B doesn't believe in the slavery. They don't believe in that law. So it makes the northern states even more upset about what's going on with slavery. And finally, we get to the election of 1860, a brand new um, uh, political party designed strictly to get rid of slavery is the Republican Party. The Republicans get Abraham Lincoln on the ticket, and he wins the presidential election. This does not go over well with the slave states. They know the Republican Party is about getting rid of slaves, and they cannot abide by that. They have to leave the Union, and that, as we said in the last lesson, they believe that they have the right to leave the Union if they choose to do so. So they start leaving the Union, And so once they start leaving, it's called secession. They pull or withdraw from. So secede is to pull out or withdraw from, and they formed a confederacy. Southern states that seceded from the Union, from the U.S. in 1860 and 1861. So now they're trying to maneuver each other, and a lot of states start leaving the United States. Um, and then finally we get to Fort Sumter. This is very important. Remember this name, Fort Sumter. Fort Sumter is the site that this is a fort in the South, in South Carolina, and the Union forces, the Northern forces, would not leave. And it's part of South Carolina. They left. They want the what they considered a foreign country's troops out of their territory, and they told them to leave. And they said, no, no, this is our fort. And so the Confederate forces bombarded it, and they surrendered, and that is what marks the beginning of the Civil War. Thanks for tuning in. I'll see you next time.